So my in-laws just called to let us know they're on their way over and we're out of food. Great. Luckily, Instacart helps me get groceries delivered in as fast as an hour. Plenty of time to cook an in-law-worthy meal. Now, what to make? Chicken parm. Perfect. Download the Instacart app or visit instacart.com to get free delivery on your first order using the code PREPARED22. Now the only thing to worry about is dinner conversation. Offer valid for a limited time. Minimum order $10. Delivery subject to availability. Additional terms apply.
Chinese Cooking Demystified is one of my favorite YouTube channels. Each week, Stephanie Lee and Chris Thomas, a married couple based out of Foshan, walk their 500,000 subscribers through a new Chinese recipe or cooking technique. They've covered everything from a Sichuan tofu rice and la zi to homemade tangyuar and my personal favorite, jianjuji, Cantonese dry roast chicken. They're part of a new generation of YouTube food creators, broadening the world's palates far beyond the Panda Kitchen offerings. Welcome to China Talk YouTube.
Yeah, thanks for having us.
Hello, everybody.
So you two in past videos have talked about how bad most English language resources are for Chinese cooking and how this was part of your motivation for starting channel in the first place. What gives? Why do cookbooks think they can get away with, not authentic, but not particularly well-tested Chinese recipes in a way they wouldn't dare to with apple pie or what have you?
I mean, it's gotten a lot better, right? I would say even in the 4 years since we've started, I would say that the general knowledge base that's out there has definitely improved. And I think part of that is a lot more China-based creators are on YouTube and kind of getting that knowledge out there. But I would say, why do certain ostensibly serious resources not know that much about Chinese cooking? Honestly, I think it's just a standards problem. I think that if you aren't very familiar with the cuisine, then you're more likely to just whip up some kind of like mediocre stir fry and think that that's good enough.
And I think lack of exposure to maybe many of the English sources, recipes are targeting non-Chinese audience, and the non-Chinese audience, their only exposures is more like maybe just the takeout. The Chinese audience, they may, they already know how to make Chinese food, so they don't, really need to learn too much. Maybe.
Yeah, I think.
Yeah, like the market, the target audience, like also the market standard was lower, and also there's like really not much other information that you can get about Chinese food. So the people that like, if they don't know something else exists, that they just don't know, right? So.
Yeah, I think another problem is actually, I feel like a lot of cooking resources within the West are really reaching for universals. Basically, a concept where all cooking is basically the same. It's the same techniques, it's the same fundamental ideas, but it's just, with a different accent. Whereas really, if you look at the entire body of cooking, whether it's within China or India or Thailand or wherever it is, that it's really more like a completely different language, that you're really looking at an entire different system and approach to cooking. And I feel like within a lot of sources that there's almost a lack of imagination where people, they can't conceptualize that it's going to be something as radically different as it is. But it's really those differences that kind of make things interesting, in my opinion.
Great. So let's go from there. So given that you two are sort of respecting the gap and like uniqueness that, Chinese cooking in general, different regional Chinese cooking in particular brings to the table, what are your principles in trying to convey that to your global audience?
When we choose what to do, we would choose what kind of interests us first. We would choose things that we find interesting, and from that starting point, and then find angles or perspective that others or a global audience or English sphere speakers would find that also interesting.
Yeah, I mean, one of the valuable things about having video as a medium, and I think that this is one of the reasons why YouTube's been an amazing platform for just cooking in general, is that when you're actually seeing somebody cook, when you're looking at the steps visually, that's you can then kind of see and contextualize the difference, right? Where if you see somebody that's stir frying and you can see with your two eyes, okay, this is step 1, step 2, step 3, then I don't know, it's a lot clearer. I don't know if that makes sense.
I think you're totally right. Kenji Lopez-Alt, someone both you and I really appreciate in recent months, I think post-quarantine, has just taken to putting a GoPro on his head and filming him cook dinner for his family. Yeah. And the amount that I have learned just from watching someone in real time do all the steps, and you see how he cuts his stuff up beforehand and the sequences, and when the recipes say until it's done, and he's like actually waiting until it's done and showing you when that moment is and why, is just such a better learning experience, especially for a cuisine which you haven't necessarily eaten at a restaurant 10 times, right? I think you're completely right here that video has a really important role to play in exposing people to the further reaches of Chinese cuisine.
Yeah, and I mean, it's also one of those things where if you're kind of in a traditional sense, how do most people around the world know how to cook? Well, they see their parents or their family members, they see them cook, right? And then you mimic that. That's really how cooking has been taught throughout generations. And it's only kind of this recent weird thing where people would read a book of recipes and use it as kind of like an instruction manual, like a technical manual for how to cook, right? That's a very kind of modern, unnatural way of cooking. So in some ways, video is kind of like taking us back a little bit, I think.
So what have been some interesting things you've learned about your audience over the process of making this channel?
I think we started to see our niche and core audience a little bit more than a year. It becomes more clear a little bit more than a year ago, something like that. Mm-hmm. I think it's more obviously since the Lao Gama video.
Sure.
Yeah. Yeah, it's like we starting to know the kind of angle we want to take more, and we started to see our audience being either, people that been to China or lived here for a bit, have like some kind of connection, know something about Chinese food, and they maybe go back. They want to recreate the taste, and also people that's like serious food nerds.
And I think one of the things that I feel like, especially, for example, I think in the past year, is a lot of people, I think, are really interested in seeing exactly what the dishes mean within the context of a certain place's culture. For example, you just talked about, Sichuan douhua fan, the tofu rice, where that's something that if you were on the coast, even like if you lived in Shanghai or, even Guangdong, you could go years and years here without really knowing what Sichuan tofu rice is, the douhua fan. But like in the places where it's popular, it is a cultural institution. So I think that a lot of people, because this country is so big, because there's so much food, and because every single place is a little bit different than the last place, there's a lot of stuff that, even if you know the country, you might not know something as granular as a specific dish.
I'll come back to the regional cuisines in 1 second. I know you have all this like crazy YouTube analytics in the back. Are there any right, countries where you're just like surprisingly popular?
Oh, that's specifically for like
chicken
one,
feet.
Yeah, dim sum chicken feet, right?
Germany?
Yeah, Germany. It's a small number, but I mean the biggest ones is really like U.S., Canada. We get like all the YouTube things, but it's an interesting breakdown where it's really kind of like our older dim sum videos are very popular in Philippines, Malaysia, Singapore.
So it seems like the southern, like the more like Guangdong-y food seems to resonate more in Southeast Asia. Is that fair to say?
Yeah.
Yeah, that's fair.
Dim sum specifically at least for us, because they also have, like siu mai or like chicken feet or other dim sum there, but it's just a little bit different. So I guess like they would maybe sometimes also want to see how it's done, this kind of thing. Mm-hmm. So yeah, that's like kind of interesting aspect for us to see that in Southeast Asia, there's this kind of connection there.
I think there's another interesting thing, specifically about dim sum videos, which is, I don't know if you've ever watched or even tried, any of those, like, really proper dim sum is no joke. It is really hard and very intense. And I think that, even within a lot of Chinese language sources, a lot of videos or resources aren't necessarily willing to go the whole 9 yards and teach you how it would basically be done at like a good chalo, like a good Cantonese restaurant. And so, I mean, like for us, like we were really curious. We just wanted to do like the really proper one. And generally, if we're doing something like cha xiao bao, the answer from basically everybody is like, oh, thanks for showing me this. I now know that I never want to try to make cha xiao bao myself. But there are some people that are food nerds that want to do the really authentic cha xiao bao, even though people that fail that recipe outnumber people that can do it like 10 to 1. But
yeah, I mean, the one you did with your parent the other day of the pomelo, and you got to squeeze it 5 times and burn the edge and then shave it off. I mean, you guys seem to really enjoy the ones that are real processes.
Yes. It's like, well, we kind of enjoy all, but the more that's like intense and process or like difficult, it's interesting in a way that it embodies a lot of cooking techniques, and that's what kind of fascinating. Like, oh, people are okay, they think like that, and when they look at an ingredient, this is like what they think about, what they want to do with it. I think that's where a lot of the wisdom it's in cooking. And it's because it's so complex or difficult or very mafan to make, that not necessarily like people are willing to do it at home even. So not many people know about the exact details in making it.
But at the same time, I think like it has to be a mix for a channel, not only to give people, some things like fried roast chicken that are a little bit more accessible at home, but also for us, because honestly, I think we still have PTSD from making like the Lanzhou La Mian. My God, it reached a point where for me, I can't do those things with my hands. Steph took over that one, and it is difficult.
So what's your process for developing a recipe? You mentioned domestic platforms have varying qualities. I'm curious for your thoughts on xiachufang and your impression in general of like home cooking lessons and the recipe ecosystem within China.
When we begin with the channel, there are less good resources on the internet. Xiachufang was one of the resources that I would sometimes go to. But in general, the online recipe platform is very similar to All Recipes. That it's like a really mix of good and bad, and not, to be honest, not that many good recipes. There are like some creators are okay. But thank God for Bilibili actually, and also like TikTok, the Chinese version, and the surge and the huge success of this country cooking creators like Li Ziqi and like Dianxi Xiaoge, that they started a trend of people from all over the country just started to film their daily cooking in the village, like old people cooking, and then also there's Wang Gang, professional chefs teaches you how to cook in the kitchen. Like in the past 2-3 years, I would say there's a lot more good resources on the internet. So on the Chinese cooking recipe spheres, it has improved a lot, but when it comes to like actual recipe researching, developing, it just involves reading a lot, like online, reading so many things, including old cookbooks, old literatures, maybe interviews, going all over the internet, watching a bunch of clips of people moved from the village cooking, maybe some chefs talking about it. For us, researching, it's a kind of a comprehensive process.
Yeah. I mean, like, just also imagine if you were going to do the same thing with Western cooking or cooking in the U.S., right? So how would you teach a Chinese audience, let's say, how to make gumbo?
Yeah.
Right? Now, you could just go to all recipes. You could search gumbo. You could choose one. But a lot of those, and I think probably anybody from the New Orleans area could probably tell you that there's a lot of garbage out there too. So you need to kind of have an eye and know, okay, what is reliable? Like, what is actually going to be kind of like the proper dish? Yeah, it's a mix of old cookbooks. It's a mix of going online, not only seeing what recipes are out there, but also seeing what the conversation's like. How are people talking about it?
Yeah.
What are local people saying, like, oh, you need to include this bit in it?
The frustration I have with using like the likes of xiaochu fang in the West, of course, is that every once in a while there's an ingredient that you can't get at your H Mart around the corner or what have you. And the kind of extra level layer that you guys have to do on your videos is saying, okay, well, you can't get this, but you can probably get that, which is something that I get frustrated when I watch like a beautiful Wangang video seeing. So can you compare a little bit the maybe aesthetics and philosophy of food YouTube versus Billy YouTube? Are there any interesting differences you've seen in how creators think about making their content?
It's not that much of a difference, actually, when you think about it. But Billy, maybe the recipe, like actual cooking recipe per se, it's a little bit less. You will see more about like either the travel vlogger style of going around to eat, and also the country cooking, kind of just showing you the process but not like tell you exactly how to cook it kind of thing. It's a little bit more on Billy. And we were also talking about like, it seems like at least for like the bigger content creators on Billy, it's that the home cooking style things are slightly less than YouTube. And
yeah,
like the quick and easy, it's like less.
Yeah, that's right. That's like one of the things that I feel like is really huge on the English language internet. It's not a space that like we ourselves are personally in, but basically things like quick and easy cooking. Things that are content that's basically teaching you, okay, this is how you can get a dish on the table fast for your family. And I feel like that kind of content is actually a lot less in China, right? Because it feels like people kind of already have that knowledge of how they can get dinner on the table for their family. So there's a lot less of that kind of like quick and easy kind of style. And it's, yeah, as Steph said, a lot more village cooking or this kind of thing. Less instruction.
So let's come back to regional cuisines. Which ones do you think are relatively approachable for home cooks, yet criminally underexplored in the West?
I think I would say Cantonese food. It's like the most approachable cuisine for people to cook in the West because of ingredient requirements.
Yeah, it's a lot less. And also the Chinese supermarkets generally carry Cantonese ingredients too.
Then the other part of the question is the less known part, like which cuisines like less known in the West or to the audience. I'll say Southwest. That's always like our like go-to answer. Minus Sichuan, like Southwest minus Sichuan, that would be the least known.
What would your guys' fast casual Chipotle spin-off dish be to open 1,000, a 1,000 chain store all across the world?
I think that if you were doing this in the United States, your fast casual thing would be a Sichuan noodle restaurant.
A noodle bar.
A noodle bar kind of thing. So you could have basically like the classics, Chongqing xiaomian, dandan noodles, MSG noodles, these kinds of things. But you could probably do it kind of like a Subway, right, where you can also choose your own toppings. And you could do everything from a centralized kitchen. Yeah, I think that would be the business idea.
Someone out there should do it, really.
And how about your high-end restaurant?
High-end restaurant. I think for we didn't talk about like that concept actually. Like we
never we never really
are
high-end restaurants good investments even?
No.
Maybe it's a.
But
no.
you know, someone's gonna listen to the show and give you guys $5 million to play around and do whatever you want with to open your.
If we were trying to choose a cuisine to get a Michelin star,
I will do Yunnan. Yunnan's
yeah.
has like so many interesting things, ingredients that it's not even know about in China, and there's that good mix, and you always, you know, it's the perfect cuisine for farm to table.
Right.
I don't know where you could get. I mean, do they have like mushrooms in Seattle or something? I don't know.
Yeah, that's true. Well, you would have to source them, right?
Yeah,
and
you need to, like,
that's
source
why it
them.
would be so expensive. I think my answer, though, I think I would want to create a high-end restaurant that would be just Shaoxing food, simply because I would want the satisfaction of giving somebody, like, paying a bunch of money for a tasting menu. I'd want the satisfaction of making course number 1 to be steamed stinky tofu. And I just want them to like have to deal with and process that.
You know, there's this one restaurant in Beijing where it's like this. I think it's like some Sichuan way of cooking fish, and at the end you get to walk out with this like entire bottle of spicy oil, and then you just get to take home and cook with it for the rest of the year. And I just think that's like a fantastic way of a fantastic take home gift for folks. Have you guys come across this?
I mean, I do think that Shaoxing food, just thinking about it, is very underrated.
Yeah,
like
Shaoxing,
that kind of like Zhejiang kind of food.
Jiangnan area
it's
food.
like
it's not the Jiangnan area food or the Huayang food that people like often think about, because that's like more like the Mandarin cuisine. When we're talking about like Shaoxing food or Jiangnan food, it's the locals, villages, common people food that not many people actually know about it, or like when they think about the area, they are not thinking about what the locals eat. It's not like the 狮子头 kind of thing. Of course they have that, but yeah, it's more like the 土菜 kind of thing.
Yeah, it's always kind of interesting, actually, the dynamic between what is the almost historical, famous cuisine, kind of like the food that was traditionally eaten by the elites, and also the food that's eaten by the common people. Lots of times, you know, you'll go around China and you'll think, oh, okay, I have an understanding of what Jiangsu food is, let's say, right? But then you get there and you're like, oh, like Yangzhou food is totally different than what I thought it was.
Do you think of Chinese food as a form of soft power? Are there broader implications for more of the world understanding and appreciating Chinese cuisine?
There was some blog article, and I forget exactly what it was, where somebody was basically just saying China's greatest soft power is a bunch of people cooking stuff on YouTube. And it's kind of true, right? You know, you have like Li Ziqi is like enormous, and so many people that like, you know, maybe would hate everything, like the entire idea of the government and the country, will just watch Li Ziqi and love them, you know? And yeah, I mean, sure, it is. I think that obviously, you know, culture is a form of soft power, right? You know, rock and roll overthrew governments, right? I don't know.
I think I like the idea the other day when we were listening to, you know, the interview with you and Xiaowei, you know, talking about when she writes about, you know, this village, people in village, about China, and she used the word humanizing. I think that's a very good, perspective to look at Chinese food or like this cooking content on YouTube or in English. It's that, yeah, it's a way of humanizing this idea of what China is, because when many people think about China, it's like, oh, this like mysterious country in the East that's, I don't know, like this socialism country, whatever. But when you actually get to see what the, you know, part of the cooking culture is, what people eat, it kind of like starts to create and build this idea of what like maybe an actual Chinese person is. And I think that's like very important, or helps the rest of the world to understand the concept of China. So is it soft power? Yes, Ash, but I like to use the term humanizing. I think it's a more accurate.
Right.
I think that's a really nice thought. And the only thing I'll say to that is like the more regional you get, the more real that becomes, right? And, you know, when you guys do a video and you say, like, this city has this food because of, like, X, Y, and Z region doing to its, like, climate and history, that's much more... You get more of that humanizing-ness, right? When it's not talking about what a billion people eat, but like what this one city, which like you can see a little video of like some guy selling this particular dish on the street is doing. So I kind of want to applaud.
Yeah, I think that's another thing though that I think is the more that you're in this kind of like food space, you know, within China, the more it's almost humbling just how much diversity that there is just within these borders. That, yeah, even within something like Cantonese food, you know, people have this concept, okay, it's one of the 8 big cuisines. Cantonese food is a cuisine, right? But then it's not the only cuisine within the Guangdong province, right? You have Chaozhou cuisine, you have Kejiao cuisine, and even within Kejiao cuisine, you have different types. You have like the Dongjiang style, which is kind of like around Huizhou. Then you have, you know, the Meizhou style, and they have different dishes. Even within Cantonese cuisine too, within this whole Pearl River Delta, if you go to Zhaoqing, which is, you know, where, you know, your mom's side is from, you know, they're going to be having different dishes, you know, some of their own special dishes than where we live right now, Shunda. So, yeah, I mean, it's something that, like, every single town has their own dishes here. And, I don't know, it's a fascinating story. And I think lots of times people have this conception of China as 1.4 billion people all marching in lockstep against a despotic government. And, yeah, I mean, no, it's not like that at all. And even if you just walk around from, you know, one place in the country to another, you're going to have very different food, language, culture.
Yeah.
Do you guys have thought the Bite of China series or other sort of like big, expensive, like Tencent or CCTV productions that try to explore Chinese food? Because, you know, there's a sense in which they're trying to do that, but there also seem to certainly be kind of like other ulterior motives going on in the way they portray that, in the way they tell those stories.
I like those series. Like, I like all of them because they have budgets, they have local connections, they have the resources to just go deep into places. But there's one thing I really don't like is that they really need to cut back on that like ASMR effect. It's very annoying.
Yeah, the audio, like every single time you have like a noodle that's going into a bowl, it's like, you know, like splashing and doing.
I can deal with that. Sometimes I need to mute it to just read the subtitles.
Yeah.
No, I mean I'll just say my one beef is like sometimes there's the thing that gets me uncomfortable about some of those is like the people that they're filming are so poor. And you know, there's a part of me which when I see these traditional techniques and I see these old men who've been, you know, cutting the noodle or pounding whatever it is for 60 years of their life. I mean, it like there's something, I guess, like noble and cool about this tradition, but it's a little less noble and cool when it's like because some guy only makes, you know, $700 a year and like this is how he has to survive and sort of there's a part which I guess is kind of like ennobling and nice and like showing that what he does has meaning, but I guess like showing that level of poverty and not kind of engaging with it as like a problem that needs to be dealt with is something that I found frustrating about those shows.
Yeah, I guess one of the things that I kind of feel, though, is that you do kind of need to interact with the idea that modern capitalism isn't exactly great for cuisine, right? That, you know, lots of times you have this person that is, you know, doing this kind of noodle that, you know, it's an incredibly high quality way of doing it that, you know, yeah, they're not going to end up making a whole bunch of money from that. But, you know, a brand like Haidilao, which is a hot pot brand, can make millions. Anyway, I don't know what the revenue is. Sure, right. Doing kind of like, slapping together a hot pot based. And it's something where industrialization is great, but at the same time, it also really has a way of really honestly killing a lot of kind of like food traditions. So I think that there's kind of a tension there. Like, yes, like what they're doing, they are poor, but at the same time, capitalism isn't the answer. I'm not sure exactly how to put this.
I think like here's the two different dynamics. They are, yes, they are poor, and they've been doing this for many years. That's because that's the only thing that they know how to do, and they can use that skill to make money. But then that's also the only thing that they know how to do. So they are kind of limited to that. And now we are looking at them as, let's say, like city developers, and as like from a food documentary perspective to look at only their skills, because we don't know. The outside world, other people don't know how to do it. And they are looking like kind of glorifying the skills, but there's like it's gonna disappear though. Like the food documentary is just basically like, okay, we're just recording this, but yeah, I think at current stage, kind of nobody knows how we can keep this tradition alive.
Well,
or like make their
if you don't film it, it's just gonna die.
I mean, that's fair, and I think hopefully we'll all at some point live in a world where people can do crazy cooking experiments as YouTubers, making 10 times as much what these people are able to make, and like have the traditions live on in that way, as opposed to this be something that these people are sort of forced into doing because they have no other options and not good enough education to pursue a different, potentially less difficult life path. Future plans for the channel? What are your guys' big dreams aside from your multi-billion-dollar Chipotle spinoff?
Right.
Let's see. We are aiming to have like a more permanent base here in Shunde, like so that we can have a home base here and go to different smaller towns or even village around China and live there for maybe 3 months, half a year, to learn about what local food is like, because traveling, it's still very different from like when you're living there, when you're being able to go to the market every morning, when you can get to know the vendors.
I think that's ultimately the logical next step, is that if we're doing, food from around the country, right? Like, I feel like we can do some very good job with Cantonese food because we live here, right? We're in Chunda, and I can go to a restaurant and I can order the stuffed chili that I'm going to be doing it and order one of the best versions, and we can test against that, eat ours, and really compare and contrast, right? So ultimately, like, we do kind of feel like we need to take the show on the road a little bit and, go live in places like, smaller cities in Sichuan or Guizhou or Fujian or these kinds of places. So that's kind of like our, upcoming goal. We'll see how that works. And then I think long-term, we also kind of want to really look at the food in the Southwest, and then also extending into the highlands of, Southeast Asia even, because some of the most interesting food, some of the most fascinating food for us is, the food that is in the Southwest, Yunnan food, Guizhou food, Sichuan food, and all of that kind of like very interesting tradition extends down into Southeast Asia, into Laos and the Shan State and Burma, and into northern Thailand. And I've been very blessed to live abroad my entire adult life. Steph is from the PRD and has been living here, so eventually we do want to, kind of be a little bit more mobile.
Sure.
Do you want to talk about making foreign food in China?
Making foreign food in China? Oh, like trying to make hamburgers and stuff?
Yeah. Like when you lived here.
I don't know. It wasn't that fun. Like, I just ordered out almost all the time because it was cheap. I don't know. I mean, quarantine year, like, I've been cooking a ton. But in China, or in Beijing at least, it's like there's just so much good food and it's so affordable. And I can order and it comes in 15 minutes that I found. Yeah, I actually looked really hard to find a Chinese cooking course. But the only ones I found were like for professional chefs that were 5 days a week or whatever. And, they're in the malls, like you can learn how to bake cakes and stuff. But I thought it was really surprising that there is like basically no millennial appetite in China for learning how to cook Chinese cuisine.
Yeah, I think that's definitely something that, there is less of this kind of like, I don't know, food nerd culture, I would say. It's kind of talking about what we were, chatting about before, where, there's not a lot of people really too interested in learning how to cook. There's people that are there's subcultures interested in baking. There's subcultures interested in craft beer or coffee. But there's not so much in terms of traditional Chinese cuisine. I think a lot of people just
take it for granted. Or they also, they might just go to their parents and their parents just cook for them, right? That's the advantage when you have your parents living in your house, taking care of your kids. When you're working, right, they can also cook a pretty good dinner, and you don't have that necessarily that same imperative.
I feel like this will come though. It's hard to imagine a future in which like folks don't start getting interested in this. In the same way that, home cooking is now like a cool thing, like has become like a cool thing to do in the past 15 or so years in the West.
There's a curve where, almost like an income curve, where if you have a society where, everybody is very poor, then everybody's cooking for themselves at home, right? And then, if you're in the U.S., right, like everybody also is cooking for themselves at home because it's way too expensive to eat out, right? But then you have this kind of like middle dip, right, where, it almost feels like, here, you can get really delicious food for really cheap, right?
I think there are still some people that are interested in cooking, but it almost feels like baking is always the starting point. You started to be interested in cooking, but then you don't necessarily think about, I want to make Chinese food because it's so common. But they would start to get interested in, I want to make bread, or I want to make cake, cookies, kind of thing. That may be a starting point. And from there, it feels like the food nerd culture in China, it's more like, especially for the younger generation, more focused on making things that are like Western food, or maybe sometimes it's more like Japanese food. That's kind of more their focus would be, because that's like some...
It's exotic,
I think it also has some... Yeah, it also something has to do with it's like you have so much developed resources on that. It's a lot easier to find legit resources to learn that. Instead of in Chinese, it's like, your parents, maybe your past experience, some cookbooks, that's it.
Yeah, what's surprising too is like, of course, most Chinese households don't have ovens, so like there's like an upfront investment of like buying a convection oven or like going to a mall to take a class to start baking in the first place.
Yeah, it's a trend though. Like when I started baking, I was in high school. There's nothing. I have this old cookbook that's like from the 80s. That's compiled by like it's in Chinese. It's a old Chinese quote unquote Western cooking book. Recipe is actually legit. It's kind of the old style, old school recipe. That was like nothing. You get nothing on how to like bake stuff. But then especially in the recent 5 years, I would say there's like a burst in Chinese domestic markets that more and more people are into baking, and the brands or different factories, companies are making small convection, affordable ovens, and people start to do that. And because I think it's so different from traditional Chinese cooking, it's actually very interesting for Chinese people to learn, like, oh, this is how you do it. Interesting kind of thing. I think that may also explains why people are more into that, because it's exotic, it's new.
That makes a lot of sense.
Different.
Just thinking about like how fun stir fry is, because it's like so fast and like you got to do all this stuff, and then thinking about that from the other perspective of like, oh, like here's this like thing and you got to let it proof for this really long time, and it's like this whole science experiment, you got to measure everything out. Like I can, I grew up with that, right? But seeing it from the other side, you can see the appeal of it being something completely different, because when you guys talk about your Chinese recipes, it's like, you put a little bit of this and a little bit of that, and it'll probably end up working out. But that's completely not the case if you're looking at hydration levels of dough or whatever.
Yeah, right.
Chris and Steph, thanks so much for being a part of Chinese Talk.
Yeah. Thanks for having us.
双手抱头，感谢老天眷顾，99的努力1%天赋。全球华人早餐线路都是我的合伙人，在世界各地遍布。Too much sauce 温豆瓣酱，锅底烧得发红，油温烧得滚烫。Too much sauce 温豆瓣酱，脚底抹了油 ，F3的变相。软烫来个豆瓣酱，小兔子们快点跑啊！现在大解放，一身白的西装发表获奖感言，我和我的兄弟们都来自大街上。24K 我们不按电镀，我的火眼金睛能够识别所有骗术。刚入行的小朋友别急着辩护，你的羡慕嫉妒毫无保留刻在面部。MASIWEI 都在夸我厉害，各路神仙都拜托我手下他们膝盖，服装产业链、娱乐产业链都走起来。A few good kids， 这是生活，这是姿态。豆瓣酱，我的音乐太辣，赚太多，我像是开了外挂，坐在原地不动，你是个呆瓜。你的娱乐神经我来帮你开发，这里有高头，我们干杯，人生如戏 ，Life is a movie， 我燃烧的斗志从来不会枯萎，我用我的实际行动让他们都住嘴。Let's go， 双手抱头，感谢老天眷顾，99的努力1%天赋。全球华人早餐线路都是我的合伙人，在世界各地遍布。Too much sauce 温豆瓣酱，锅底烧得发红，油温烧得滚烫。Too much sauce 温豆瓣酱，脚底抹了油 ，F3的变相。不要轻易站我旁边，钻石泰山，现在就像一道闪电。说我是 rapper 来未免太过片面，不是一个企业家把梦想全都变现。BA 无论怎样传来声浪，曙光灯 pose 落在我的身上，无论让宅男们都别来奔放。Let's go， 需要好儿童们全都跟上。我真是学校里面最屌 Peter， 但当我说唱变成不老的 Peter。Hip Hop 恶魔故事吃的让我变得 swagger， 1秒钟都不想坐下，我要一直站着，感受下我的威力 ，International 我的魅力，大巡回围直接飞机 ，Stay on the top 代表我的 city， 制定属于我的规则，制定属于我的规矩。小时候心里我开始历险，偶尔的失败也无法避免，感受不到痛就不会疲倦，燃烧的火焰在瞳孔里面。披肩豆瓣酱，我把我的城市扛在我的肩上，黑马王子塞维加已经开始出现人传人的现象。Let's go， 双手抱头，感谢老天眷顾，99的努力1%天赋。全球华人早餐线路都是我的合伙人，在世界各地遍布。Too much sauce 温豆瓣酱，锅底烧得发红，油温烧得滚烫。Too much sauce 温豆瓣酱，脚底抹了油 ，F3的变相。
So my in-laws just called to let us know they're on their way over, and we're out of food. Great. Luckily, Instacart helps me get groceries delivered in as fast as an hour. Plenty of time to cook an in-law worthy meal. Now, what to make? Chicken parm. Perfect. Download the Instacart app or visit instacart.com to get $20 off your first order using the code PREPARED20. Now the only thing to worry about is dinner conversation. Offer valid for a limited time. Minimum order $35. Delivery subject to availability. Additional terms apply.